Theodore. He's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Bodak, Hank and George, and the harbor master too.
So picking up where we left off from George Buzzes the Dock, the Great Harbour Cleanup Contest is now underway. A special flag is to be given to the winner who does the best job. And in all the excitement, the tugs begin discussing what their plans are for the contest.
I'm going to speak to some of the ships and boats and ask them not to throw litter in the water, said Emily proudly. I'm going to use my underwater sonar machine to find junk on the bottom of the harbor, declared Fodak. Next, it was George's turn. I'm going to tow some of the rusty wreck to the scrapyards, he boomed. Then Hank told everyone what he was going to do. He cleared his throat once and let out a little smoke. I'm going to clean up all the garbage in the whole harbor, he said. The other tugs were silent a moment. Hank's plan was big. In fact, it was the biggest and best plan any of them had thought of. That is, except for Theodore. See, they thought Theodore would certainly have the biggest and best plan of them all. All the good plans are taken, I guess, he said quietly. I think I'll just clean the little wooden dock. The little wooden dock? The other tugs didn't think that was much of a plan. I mean, Theodore's plan seemed so small, and the others were so big. How would he ever win the contest? Theodore was sad.
Leave it to Hank to be the one with the biggest plan. You would think a plan like this would come from someone like George. Guess not. And I do feel a little bad for Theodore. Regardless, if it's a small plan or not, he should just do a good job anyway. All of them should, honestly. But anyway, Lily Lighthouse blows her foghorn and the contest begins.
Emily asked Fillmore the ferry to tell his passengers to please not throw their litter in the harbor. Fodak was pulling Buena Vista barge along, and she had her special lifting crane. George began to pull pieces of the rusty wreck up onto his deck using his strong towing rope. Hank began his big plan. He searched and he searched, and finally he found what he was looking for. An old fishing net. Meanwhile, Theodore was using his bumpers to scrub and rub away the grime and gunk on the little wooden dock. It's a very small plan, really, he said to himself, and I probably won't win the contest. Oh, well.
Poor Theodore. Now I'm starting to feel bad for him. Who knows? Maybe you might win. But continuing, the tugs return to the dock to have a little rest, and they begin to talk about the things they've already done so far for the contest.
I spoke to 7 ships, and they all promised not to litter or empty their dirty water in the harbor anymore, said Emily. I found a junk car, lots of old oil drums, and some bumpers, announced Fodak. Now it was George's turn. I've almost finished towing some of the rusty wreck to the scrapyards, he roared. Everyone turned to Hank. All morning long, the tugs had been keeping their eye on him, and they were all very puzzled. None of them knew quite what it was he had actually done. Hank smiled calmly and told the dispatcher, I have finished getting ready to begin cleaning up. In a very quiet voice, Theodore said, I've cleaned up half of the little wooden dock.
Oh, Hank, you're such a clown. But that's why we love you. Anyway, after their rest, the tugs head out to finish the contest. Hank then calls Fodak over and tells him that he's part of his plan to clean up all the garbage. With that said, Fodak thinks Hank will win for sure with a plan that big, and the same happens for the rest of the tugs.
So Foduck decided that he would find all the junk on the bottom of the harbor. Then he would win the Great Harbour Cleanup Contest. When Emily heard that Foduck was going to clean all the junk on the bottom of the harbor, she was sure that Foduck would win the contest. So she decided she would get everyone in the harbor to stop littering. But there were so many ships and boats in the Big Harbour. Emily didn't know where to begin. Well, when George heard what Emily was doing, he decided to move the whole rusty wreck to the scrapyards. Then he would certainly win the contest. He tied his towing rope all around the rusty old ship. Then he gave the rope a great yank. But he hadn't been counting on the part of the wreck that was underwater. It was so heavy, George's tow rope snapped as if it were a single strand of string, and the wreck sank with a sinking sound. Foduck, who was nearby, heard the loudest poing, poing he had ever heard on his underwater sonar machine. "It looks like a big old shipwreck is down there," he said. "I'll have to clean that up, since I'm going to clean up everything." Bonavista Barge was worried, but Foduck insisted she lower her hook to pull up the great ship. But she couldn't. It was simply too big. Finally, after he'd gathered a huge load of garbage in the old net, Hank decided it was time to haul it up and take it to the garbage barge. He gave his tow rope a mighty heave. As he was hauling up his great big load of garbage, Hank heard an awful sound. A ripping sound, like net ripping, like old fishing net ripping. Hank had put so much garbage in the old net, it had ripped apart. All the garbage he had been collecting so carefully floated away as if he'd never done any work at all. "I'll never clean up the whole harbor now," thought Hank, "and I won't win the contest." And he began thinking about his big plan. And the more he was thinking, the less he was doing. As a matter of fact, all the tugs were thinking. Now that their plans were so big, how would they ever get them done and win the contest? And the more they were thinking, the less they were doing.
Before we continue, back up a little. Why the hell is Campbell's model at the bottom of the harbor? If you all remember some episodes ago, the wreck was taken to Dock 9 in True Blue Friends. How did it get here all of a sudden? I think that's another question that even science can't answer. Oh, and by the way, rip to Hank's fishing net. Literally. Anyway, now that the tugs are worrying about their plans, there's still one tug working. Good old Theodore. Soon after, the contest ends and the dispatcher announces the winner.
"And the winner is," said the dispatcher, and the tugs all held their breath. "Theodore." "Theodore?" The other tugboats were amazed. "But," said Foduck, "he was only cleaning a little dock." "It wasn't the biggest plan," said Hank. The dispatcher explained that Theodore was the winner because he was the only tug who finished the plan he had started, even if it was the smallest plan of all.
Well, that's no surprise that Theodore won the contest. Whether he finished the plan or not, I think we all could have predicted that. But anyway, as the tugs pass by the beach later that day, Theodore notices that it's still covered in garbage.
In all the excitement of trying to win the contest, the tugs had forgotten all about why they had the contest in the first place. The children. They still hadn't come back. Theodore began to think. He was thinking about the Great Harbour Cleanup Contest and big plans and small plans, but most of all, he was thinking about the children. The more he was thinking, the louder he raced his engine. And the louder he raced his engine, the faster his propeller went spinning, and the faster Theodore went. What was he doing? Theodore! Theodore! Cried the others. Well, it looked like he might crash right into the beach. At the last moment, Theodore turned sharply from the beach, making a big wave that splashed up on the sand, and it washed some of the garbage into the water. Theodore kept splashing and splashing away. And even though he wasn't cleaning up the whole harbor, Theodore began to feel just as happy as if he was. Now let's get going and clean this up as a team, yelled Theodore. And with that, all the tugs helped Theodore push the litter to the garbage barge. A little later, just as the afternoon was putting on a golden scarf for dinner, the tugs were on their way home from work when they saw a wonderful sight. The children. The children had come back to the clean sandy beach. Well, that day, everyone was a winner. The tugs and the children, everyone in the Big Harbor.
And that concludes the Great Harbour Cleanup Contest. Okay, David, your thoughts?
At the end of the day, this episode was actually pretty decent. It was miles better than George Buzz's the Dock, in my opinion. I'm all for saving the planet, and watching this episode makes me even more of a green freak, if you would. And this episode was just incredible to me. Like, I love the idea of a contest to clean up the harbor, to see who could clean up the most trash. And it works.
Now, this one was actually pretty good. It was really fun to see all the tugs doing their part to clean up the harbor for one. And when their plan started to backfire, I couldn't help but feel bad and chuckle at the same time, especially with Hanks. As for the story, once again, I think it sends a great message to kids, letting them know that it's important to keep our surroundings clean of any kind of garbage, and we should all do our part to keep it that way. I guess maybe the only thing that could have been a little predictable was the fact that Theodore won the contest, but that's only a minor complaint. Now, whether you consider them characters or not, viewers get to see full-on models of the children this one time. They do look a little creepy, but had they been upped a little, I actually would have loved to see how these children characters could have been incorporated further into the show. Kinda like what they do with Thomas. For visuals, we get some really nice shots of the tugs working in all kinds of different areas in the harbor, and my personal favorite, the sandy beach. And all I can say for the music are the same intros we usually hear, and a new short ditty with Theodore cleaning the dock, which I love, seeing as how that kind of plays in my head whenever I do my own work. Overall, as I said, I think this episode is a great pickup from where we left off with part 1, and I highly recommend checking it out. Up next is Best Friends.